So we'll give us a couple more minutes. Afterwards, if we have time, it's a good time for Q&A. But I honestly have so many slides, I'm not sure we have it. If that occurs and we have another talk right after it, I'll be outside if you want to ask any questions. I am in charge of the DC VR group for Virginia. My background is software engineering. I'm a user interface expert, software design, software languages, mostly Apple platforms, but I'm getting more and more into VR using Quest and the Android devices built into that device, as well as augmented reality, which I think in the long term may be the more important thing than virtual reality, but it's really not quite there yet. We have the hardware, we have great hardware for VR. AR hardware is still proof of theory. It really hasn't gotten good enough yet. And part of the problem, we'll talk about that, part of the problem is we don't have good location. You really do really good, everyone wants the Tony Stark experience. And to get that working, you really need to have GPS, military grade GPS, which most cell phones do not give you. It's possible, but it has terrible battery life then, so they don't do it. There's also licensings, and there's a slight security issue. The military doesn't really want us to have that level, which I can understand. You hook a GPS device to a drone and you get some scary stuff. Okay, a few more minutes here. Got any questions? What do you want to talk about? What do you want to hear? Who feels like they're a complete newcomer? Oh, great. We're actually oriented towards you. This talk's going to be about half of it going over terms you have to know, and the other half actually about real devices. We're actually going to see and understand what's happened. And there's been quite a bit of development over the past year.
Just wanted to check and make sure you're okay with being recorded.
Oh yeah, I got a 360 camera here. I don't have time to set it up. Yeah, but for Christmas, my family, I bought it, I gave it to them, they gave it to me for Christmas. Someone else does that. A 360 video camera. And I'll be here at the conference taking a lot of videos. Yeah, actually in my spare time, I'm a swordsman. And I'm doing a 360 martial arts experiment where we're gonna go around the dojos and have people do forms and record them and put them up there in a non-profit organization. I think that's a cool idea, but we'll see how it works out. Okay. Yes?
You might think it over in the talk, but do you foresee any killer apps coming out in 2020?
That's actually my last slide. Is everyone familiar with the term killer app? Killer app is what defines the platform. It is the app that really made the product coming out. Now, I'm an old timer. The original PCs and Apple IIs, the killer app was VisiCalc. First spreadsheet was what absolutely made the computer industry because they saw there was something you could never do again. For the Macintosh, when it came out, the killer app was desktop publishing. Up until that time, it wasn't very successful. It was cool, it was great user, and people who used it, loved it, but to do something you could never do before. We haven't had a killer app yet. And by the way, I'm sorry, I love games too, but there is not very often a killer app as a game. Usually a killer app is something, a utility or business or even day-to-day life that you cannot do anywhere else. We have the hardware, we have the content, it's easy to create. No one's come up with the killer app yet. And that's a little bit of genius, and I cannot predict that. I hope it's this year.
Do you think that, because now that it's getting a little bit more popular, small-time, lesser-known companies are starting to make their own headsets. Do you think they'll ever really going forward be able to compete with the Vives and the? Well,
the talk's not going to go in the do-it-yourself area. But there is an initiative called OpenVR over in China more than here, which tries to make it modular and so that things interlake. If I'm a small company, I'm trying to do a custom glasses. It'd be nice if I could use someone else's tower, someone else's controllers. That's what the OpenVR standard is trying to do. We'll talk about that briefly in the talk. Vive's pushing it, as well as the people who did excuse me, I'm drawing a blank. People who do Steam. Valve, thank you. The Valve's pushing it. It's kind of cool because among other things, if I have my devices and I want to get a gun that's a VR device that can be tracked and everything, you can buy someone else's and it works together. However, the industry works against that. It's not in the industry's interest to do that. Is why we have Macs and PCs right now. So we're talking about a problem in technology in general about interoperability. I'd settle for software to be interoperable, okay? So it's easier to write software that runs on different platforms. Most people use Unity to do that.
Your comment though about, again, China. I just bought a new printer, and of course it's sending the signal back to HP. You know, they're counting my pages, they tell me when my ink's low. And I don't think the Chinese do anything just solely for money. Then you have like you said, if you have a weapon and it's tagged somewhere via the GPS, then there's programs now where, you know, they can just put you on your green dot on a map, you know, regardless, and they're just, you know.
That's a whole different talk on security. Yes, I understand that. I'm actually involved in that industry. I understand the issues there. I do not want to open that can of worms for this talk. Sorry. It's a completely different area of security. Well, let's talk offline for that one. Okay. Yes, sir.
Are there any brands or companies that surprised you that got into the VR game?
Well, there's ones that surprised me that didn't do well. Magic Leap, we'll talk about that one. It has turned out to be somewhat of a failure. They've had a couple executives, big executives like CFO and the CTO both left the company. They had $1 million in the bank, but everyone says, oh, that's great, you got $1 million in funds. That also means you're paying $1 million on interest. And they don't have any product, and they're eating it through. And I wasn't there, but I saw it online, their conference in September, and man, I'd never seen such an unprofessional conference in my life. And I've been in the industry for 30 years, so no, I would not recommend. So I was surprised at how badly they did. You know who's the secret company most people don't think about for VR? Sony. Sony's PSVR, we'll talk about that shortly, has 10 million of them out there. That's the #1 VR platform. So yeah, they have the hardware, the glasses are not expensive. I mean, $300. They have a very powerful GPU, a very powerful system, software delivery program.
Actually made the controllers useful.
Yeah, I wish it didn't make me nauseated. And that's a real important thing. I'm going to have a whole talk about being nauseated because #1 rule, don't make your customers sick. And unfortunately, VR does that. Okay, we got a few more seconds. Ones that surprised me pleasantly. We'll talk about the #1 important thing that I think happened, and I'm not going to tell you until we get to the talk. The most important thing that happened this year, I'll show you where it is, okay? Because I think it possibly may be the future. God knows whenever Apple actually gets into the AR. I have contacts at Apple. They're working on things. Problem is they work on lots of stuff that never see the light of day, and they have some amazing patents. Apple makes a lot of patents which they don't enforce, but they make them so that other people don't hit them with patent infringement. And they bought out a very high-end company that does amazing glasses. So we'll see what happens. Oh, nice to see more people here. I gave my first talk at Macworld years ago, and there was like 4 people in the audience. And I was like 21. I was scared to death. Okay, let's start about it. Hello, what?
You needed Wi-Fi?
No, I got it.
Oh, you got one?
I didn't have the, nice to see you, by the way.
Yeah, by the way.
I had the wrong cable, so I had to transfer the file from this device to my phone.
Oh, okay.
So
Are you good for now?
I'm good for now.
Okay, thanks.
He's the gentleman who's in charge of all our talks, so please say thank you to him.
Sorry we're late, but let
No,
you still set
no
up.
problem.
Hit me up in Panels HQ when you're done.
Of course.
So we can chat, catch up.
You take care. This is, I think, the 4th time I've given this talk, and every time I've changed it, okay? It's about the State of the Union. We want to talk about where VR is right now, possibly where it's going. As I said before, who here has never tried VR? I guarantee you there are VR stations here at the conference. Go put on the glasses. Oh, let's try something tricky. Who's been into the void? Yeah, isn't that cool? That's a virtual reality arena over in Tyson's Corner. It's the same one that's done at Disney World. They do, yeah, you should go. It's expensive, $40, and I don't really think it's very repeatable. So you go there and do the adventure, but it's kind of cool. They have 4 different adventures.
Is it a room?
Yeah, it's a room.
Room-based VR?
It's what's called hyper reality, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Who has a VR device? Now, almost everyone should raise their hands because you have a phone. Phone's a fairly good VR device, very good AR device, but we're talking about standalone one. Okay. Who has one that plugs into their PC? Who has one that stands by itself? Okay. Let's talk about the State of the Union. What we want to talk about. Is this the year for VR? The problem with this is I was asked, is 2019 the year for VR? Is 2018? Is 2017? My first VR experience was back in 1988, where I played a very good virtual reality glass system. But we couldn't do anything other than toss the teapot up in the air and catch it. That was the only thing we could do with it. And it also ran for about $250,000. So VR is improving, software is improving, content is improving. We have cameras now, very inexpensive. Is it the year of VR? I don't know. Let's find out. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about everything that's on this slide here. Maybe one or two that's gone out of business, but that's mostly what I want to talk about. We're going to be talking about commercially available products in the United States. Sorry, the Chinese market I am not going to talk about because it gets kind of convoluted and it doesn't actually transfer over here very much, with some exceptions. It's also going to be talking about commercial products. We are not talking about military, academic research. I'm sorry. They have some wonderful academic ones, but they're one-shot deals. Do-it-yourself kits, esports are starting to see VR, or entertainment centers like The Void. We are not going to talk about that. That's another talk. So we're going to talk about the concepts, the hardware, and the software. First time I gave a VR talk, I found out very quickly that unless you understood the terms, I couldn't explain it to you. So we're going to start talking about the concepts. And here's the concepts, some of the ones. Room scale, tracking sense, field of vision. Who here understands every single one of these? Get out of here. Come back in about 20 minutes. No. Stick around, because you'll be surprised. It's the devil's in the details. You might not know everything about this. So what do we start with? We start with abbreviations. This is a talk about VA, AR, MR, XR, SR. Oh my. Anyone knows all the abbreviations? SR? Shared reality. MR, XR, these are all legitimately used terms. What really drives me crazy is the difference between MR and AR. Just remember, it all started with a book called Artificial Reality back, I believe Ringfold is the author's name. I can't quite read that there. But this was one of the very first talks. Now, this had been talked about in, not academic, not area it had been talked about in science fiction. Science fiction writers have been talking about VR for a while, but this was the one, the very first ones that actually took it serious. And he called it artificial realities. He talked about an interactive, immersive environment. They didn't even know about glasses back then. They thought, well, yeah, there was some glasses. They thought possibly they'd be inside of a dome, like a planetarium, or what was called a cave back then, were projected along the walls. There are a lot of interesting experiments, and those are all forms of artificial reality and virtual reality. There is a very valid idea that if you're reading a book, you're in a virtual world. So the more that you are immersed in that world, the better it is. Now let's talk about the actual terms. Virtual reality, nowadays that really means a CGI standalone device, whether or not it's tethered to the PC or standing alone there, in the sense that you're wearing it and you're by yourself. Augmented reality, that means that you're on CGI on the real world. In a VR world, you don't see the real world. It's completely cartoon. Now, it may be photorealistic, but that's all you see. Augmented reality is I'm looking at you and there is a cartoon character right next to you. Or over your head, there has information about where you live. I often call this the Tony Stark reality, because everyone's seen Iron Man, okay? Then we have the term mixed reality. Okay, this was pushed by, it wasn't originated by Microsoft, but it was really heavily pushed by Microsoft. This means that not only does it have a cartoon in front of you in the real world, but you know where the real world is. So I love the example that Microsoft did for one game where they knew where the wall was and they knew where the table was, and a whole portal opened in the wall and alien robots dropped out, and they had landed on the table, and they landed on the floor, and they knew the difference between the platforms. So a mixed reality is when we actually know where surfaces are and physical things are in the real world, and you interact with the real things. It's when you see ones where they have little tokens and the AR glasses know where the token is, and they animate a dragon around it, and you reach out and you move the token and the dragon moves. That's where you're mixing reality. And that is just starting last year really heavily. We're going to see it more next year. I have no idea what to use it for, but it's kind of tool. Virtual reality is, like I said, these are glasses when you cover your house. You notice there is no holes, there's no cameras. This is virtual reality. Augmented reality are done two general ways. One is you wear glasses over there that you see on the one on the right has a little hole where the camera, and the camera there projects the reality on top of it. Or you hold your device up like the iPad there. Apple has a very famous game for shooting bricks across each other on a table between different people. You have to hold the device. Pokemon, who plays Pokemon? First one is artificial reality. That's one of the most common ways of doing it. You notice it didn't really interact with the real world for the first version of it. Mixed reality. These are ones of two ways of doing it. This is what I call Microsoft's mixed reality. You either have clear glasses that project light on it so you see it in the real world, or you have completely covered ones that have cameras. Again, most of these identify where you are by looking at plane surfaces, seas, walls, and the places in the reality. The other terms, it's a whole mess, especially when you come to XR, because I've heard 4 different explanations of what XR means. There is no standardization. There's no ISO standard for what the hell this stuff means. SR, shared reality, that means telepresence. Let's say I have an art program and it allows me to draw on the wall and augmented reality, and you come up wearing your glasses and you can see it. We have just shared a reality. So any multiplayer games by its nature is a shared reality. But think of it as more of a presence where we're sharing data together. XR, some people use that term to mean VR, XR, AR all together. It just means extended reality, extreme reality, anything else you could begin with an E or X, they've been tied on the XR. People like X. Yes, there is a XXXR. The rule does apply. There are 1 or 2 VR glass devices out there exclusively for adult content. Yep. And hyperreality. This is kind of interesting. This is a term that came out and has kind of shifted the meaning. It means reality where you're in a VR world, but there's physical presence, the void. You walk into a room. Now on the wall is a window out to the sea or in space, but the wall's there. So if you reach out your hand and touch the wall, you feel it. You have a gun in your hand. It's a real, blaster. I did the Star Wars game, and we had blasters. And in the VR world, you could see it, but in the reality, you held it and pointed it around. So it has a physical presence that goes around with the virtual presence. We're just starting to hit the scratch on this one. And this is more common than anything else in arenas where you go out and play. I've yet to see a hyper-reality example. Maybe you could classify, who remembered the Jedi Challenge that came out last year? Yeah, well, you actually had a lightsaber and a cardboard box, you put your phone into it, and the lightsaber was in the real world. So you used it. And
is this regarding also for, I think Oculus came out with that little puck that you could attach to objects that then it would be considered?
Yeah, kind of. It seems to apply more for the wall and the area around you because we've always had controllers. But we're starting to see, I would say hyperreality, the VR the gun or the controller. They have a controller out which puts your 2 controllers together so there's physically between it. If you want to have fun, go take a look at Microsoft's experimental lab. They have tons of VR about custom devices they made. They're not going to sell them, but they're experimenting of trying to give you haptic feedback and having your hand feel things in the virtual world. That's in that area. So what about categories? We've already touched what we are. These are the different ways that I have divided, and what I love the fact is I did this division about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and other people are doing the exact same division without looking at it because it's logical. We have high-end VR. That means you're plugged into the device. Standalone VR, mixed reality, mobile devices, and cardboard headsets. Now, what's the difference between a high-end VR and a standalone VR? Yeah, by the way, last year, I would say this was absolute. Things have changed this year, and we'll get into it in a second, but it still is a good concept. High-end ones, the GPU, the graphics processing unit, is not on the device. It's on the PC, and you have a cable attached, or in some cases, you have Wi-Fi going, okay? So all the calculation is done on your PC. You need a PC. The standalone devices aren't as powerful. They're generally Android devices running probably what they call a Dragonfly GPU. Nowadays, they're almost identical graphics, actual vision, but the GPU isn't as powerful. Obviously, if the more powerful you are, the more animation you can do, the better graphics it looks. But the low-end ones are quite good for doing a lot of different things, so that may be the best way to start. Mixed reality, we've already talked about this. Microsoft has pretty much carved out a niche for mixed reality. They released, and this is one of the few instances where they did a standard. They released a standard, and they did their HoloLens, and then about 5 other companies came out with mixed reality glasses. Has not been a big success.
Keep from Microsoft?
Microsoft, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, but yeah, Microsoft is not pushing the HoloLens. It's too expensive, they recognize. They're going after military government contracts. They're going after, they don't think, yeah, it'd be nice to play games, but that's not about. It's all about training people. It's all about telepresence. And even then, the SDKs keep changing, so it's not a commercial viable product. As a software developer, I would not recommend, unless you have a guaranteed contract for 100,000 units somewhere, I would not recommend developing for the HoloLens. Mobile devices, what does that mean? That means you picked up your device, you turn on the camera, and you look at something, it identifies the surface, maybe identifies the object, and as you move around it, you look around it in all directions. It is fantastic for a low-end machine. Both iOS and Android has it. Also, Google Cardboard, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, which was a really cool experiment that came out of Google. Here's mobile devices. Apple had the first AR kit. Android has come out since then. In my opinion, the AR kit from Apple is superior. I've worked with both of them, okay? And Apple's still coming out. They're giving real hints that there may be glasses in the future, but we haven't had really good AR glasses yet. You may see a lot of Kickstarters out there with AR glasses. Someone asked about whether or not a small company could do it. I don't know. My gut feeling is no, because you need to have the hardware, the software, the support. It's too easy to go out of business. Magic Leaps has $1 billion, and they look like they're going out of business. A Kickstarter can keep going. So I expect the big guys to come in this one. Google Cardboard. Who has a Google Cardboard? Okay, Google Cardboard was a skunk project at Google. They said, hey, they give your guys a couple months off to go work on a project, and 2 guys had the idea, let's do VR. Have all the graphics here. We have an accelerometer. We have a tilt indicator. By the way, they don't actually use inertial dampers to decide where your tilt. They're using a magnet compass. That's the best way to determine the tilt of your device. So let's put a little cardboard box, and the first one literally was cardboard, put it in there, split the screen, and we have a halfway decent VR device for $5. The first ones actually had a little thing on the side, so that if you pressed the side, a mechanical arm inside touched your screen, and that was all the controls you had. These were so popular, they were popping up in magazines for a while. Still, open source, you can buy the thing online, you can cut, I've known people who cut them out themselves. Homemade cardboard box, that's all it is. Couple lenses and the cardboard. Don't do it. You can get another one for $10 online. Headsets, these are a step above Google Glasses. These are actual people who've made a comfortable, because the cardboard box isn't comfortable, not for hours, a comfortable controller. I have both of these. Your device still goes inside of it. It's handheld set. Generally, sometimes you have a good external controller, because the one thing you want to do is, click buttons. You stare at something, and by staring at it, you select it, and then you press the controller, which is usually a USB, to indicate you turned it on. That's a way of collecting bot buttons. This is definitely old school in the sense that we've gone past it. What's the difference between the cardboard and the headset? Is the headset one better than the cardboard one?
Some of them have a controller.
It's the same phone. Since they don't, other than the controller, that's the only difference, and comfort. There is absolutely nothing because your phone is the one going in. By the way, it was different when all the phones were the same size. Make sure you have the one for the right size. With the phones that are this big and this big, I actually have some that don't fit in the other ones. So the only difference is the comfort in the controller. You're exactly right. Let's talk about degrees of freedom. This is a very important concept and you have to understand it. Degrees of freedom has to do with motion. Anyone here fly? Pilot? What do we call it? Pitch?
Pitch,
Yaw?
roll,
And what's the other one?
roll.
Roll, very good. I was a pilot. All three, that determines your orientation in the world. That's 3 degrees of motion. The other 3 degrees are motions of movement. You move this way, up. Generally called X, Y, Z, okay? So a device at 6 degrees of motion understands this. If I put a Google Cardboard glass on and I'm in the middle of a virtual movie, it's wonderful. But if I take 3 steps this way, the movie hasn't moved. I have moved. The world has moved with me. If I put on a Quest device and I am in certain games and I move, it actually knows that I've moved with me. So the controllers, which are 3 degrees, are a little older. They're perfectly good for certain things. 6 degree gives you more freedom. And the thing also applies for the controller that you hold in your hand. The Oculus Go can know which way you tilt it, but it doesn't understand the distance between it. Who here has played the Google Paint program? It's a wonderful program. It's one of the best, probably the best non-game program I know. You draw in the air and it stays there and you walk around it and you can paint sculptures, you can just paint things in there and animate it. It's fantastic. You couldn't do that unless you knew where the controller was in the 3D world. So it actually knows where it is because it has the same sensors on it that you do.
You mean tilt brush?
Tilt brush, thank you. Tracks your tilt, tracks your head, tracks your position. So what you think about is really is the difference between your head is, or it's just where your head and positioning is. It's basically orientation showing it. Oh yeah, every once in a while you hear about X degrees of motion. What's that about? Ignore that. That's a term from the robotics industry. Your hand had a 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, 4 degree of motion, and when the early days of VR, they kind of applied it because, oh, this is 3 degrees, and would have a controller be X degrees. It's a misnomer. If anyone hears someone say, oh, we have 7 or 8 degrees of freedom, it doesn't exist in the VR world, but it pops up enough to be confusing. Don't understand the term. They're talking about something else. Room scale. I bet you've been hearing about this talk. Room scale is the result of 6 degrees of freedom. You are moving around inside of a room now, and there's permanency. What's that say? Oh, I'm sorry. Wow, that's the first time I've been accused of not being loud enough. Okay, room scales means that there is a physical reality. Generally, a room scale system either has lighthouses in the corner, or you define the area up at setup. Once it's done, you're inside the room. One of the cool things about room scale is if you set it up right, you won't trip over the chairs because they're off on the side. You left up an open area inside. It has permanency. It has movement around the side. The important thing about room scale is you can't go out of the room scale. You don't go out of the container. You don't go outside the lighthouses because then it doesn't know your position. Most of them give you some warning. If you're playing Oculus Quest, you see a grid up here. And if you go through the grid, you actually see a black and white version of the world telling you to get back in the grid, in the room scale. Room scale is practically identical to 6 degrees of freedom. There's a slight difference. 3D tracking is the simplest, is almost required for VR. Is done by using internal sensors. I already mentioned this, the magnetometer, the accelerometer, the gyroscope. It's almost only commonly occurred is inertial sensors. That determines exactly where you are. Early 6 degrees are ones, I'm going to be running out of time, so I'm going to zoom through this one a little faster. Excuse me, this is actually a 2-hour talk. I'm coming down. It's important to know the lighthouse in, out, in. Some project light or sound in here and you have sensors on your head. Other ones, you have lights on your head and it goes out. They have the exact same effect, but that means the controllers are different, the lighthouses are different. After a while, people started saying, maybe we can do something better than this. Oh, by the way, it's generally infrared, which is why you don't see it. Here's some of the lighthouse designs. The ones on the left is the one for the Oculus, the ones on the right is the one for the Vive. Oculus ones looked a lot like microphones originally. You put 2 of them on the desk, and then they said, this isn't enough, let's put 3 of them on there. And Rift came along, the Vive one, and said, no, let's put them up in the ceiling and get some good triangulation. This is the way I do it. I mount it on the right-hand side on a portable, one of these right here.
A good way to do it is shower curtain rods.
Yes. I'm in my basement, I have them mounted on the wall, but then I take them down. Though I haven't been using them very much since of the Quest, and we'll talk about that in a second. So we have sensors determining exactly where you are inside the room. What's the future? Not having this. I actually should take this off because the future is here. Okay, think about this. We have light coming down, you have a sensor that determines your picture. What's light in a sensor? There's another name for that is the camera. So they started experimenting with having cameras on your device and no light sources to be able to detect the walls. And the first ones to do this was the HoloLens. And they could actually detect your location in the room. And then they did the Quest, and there are other devices out there. That is becoming more and more important. And we'll talk about which devices it is. So actually having a lighthouse is kind of old school. It is better resolution than doing it with cameras, with the Quest, but they're almost getting to be exactly the same now. This is a new slide because this became important. Field of vision. Who played with the HoloLens? HoloLens 1? What was the most annoying thing about it? Yeah, 30 degrees. That's all you got of vision, which means if you had a large object close, you literally have to turn your head back and forth to see it. How much? I used to scuba dive, so I'm used to glasses, but that cuts down your track and you got to look around. So we've had devices that are doing more. Most people see almost 180, in some instances more than 180. So devices that have small field of vision, not so good, more and more and more, this is real important. I do not mind a small field of vision after a certain side. Some people do. The Pixmar, which we will be talking about shortly, has an amazing field of vision outside the range of most people's eyes. So if this is important to you, you should look at that when you get a device. Most, if you get one that's at least 90 degrees like this, that's usually enough for most things. Because at 90 degrees, you don't mind turning your head around and you don't lose it. When it's 30 degrees, you lose the idea you're in a VR world. Tethered or untethered? We've talked about this. Is it better to have a cable or is it better not to have a cable? It's better not to have a cable. The first time you trip over a cable, you will find this out. Because you're playing super hot. And you're turning around and you're thinking, it's attacking me. No, the cable just wrapped around your legs. So untethered is definitely the way to go, whether it's Wi-Fi or some other streaming to your device or whether or not it's a standalone device. But if graphics is most importantly, then you're gonna have to deal with the tethered. Sometimes it's called free range. Requires cables, low ones do not. 360 video, that's what my camera does. It takes an MPEG picture that's been stretched around. When you put your glasses on, you watch it. It's amazing. It is really have you there. There are some downsides of it we'll talk about in a second, but this is what we talk about when we say 360 video, sometimes mistakenly called VR video, but it's really 360 camera. YouTube has a channel. Half the apps in the App Store for VR devices play video playback. This will be the year of the content because we have cameras that are cheap now. It is the single most popular category of app. Everyone wants to be the YouTube for VR, which means they have their own stores and apps in the store. It's fairly easy to contact. There is no 6th degree of freedom. And a very important thing is, we'll talk in a second, is sound. Haptic. Term for haptic means feedback. The simplest haptic device in the world is the vibrating. So let's say there's a fire there, and I reach out my controller, and it vibrates, it gets to the fire. I equate that, I just burned myself. That's amazing. The more senses you have, the more important it is. We're having the haptic devices, who did the void? Your chest vibrated when you got hit by the laser. That was kind of shocking. You get the definite impression. Controllers vibrating, we're experimenting with hand gloves that would restrict your movement. These all fall in the same category. Now, there are not very many haptic devices out there. This is not the year of haptic. Most of them are like haptic suits, high-end, very limited number. But that is what the term means. If someone says your game doesn't give much haptic feedback, it means it doesn't have any vibration in it. It gives you a sense of inclusion. There's a, yeah, like I said, vibration is the most common. Very important for feedback. It requires either a controller or the mouse. In some instances, they vibrate the head. No commercial apps do it, but I've seen some do-it-yourself ones do it, and that's surprising. Yeah, it does give you a little bit of a tingle the first time it happens. So we're going to start seeing some more of this, but we're not quite there yet. This is the future. Look at this. This is a guy who's wearing his gloves that vibrate an individual finger, his body, his head. This may be a little more true immersion. The only problem with this is, remember, that means you got to put all this stuff so it's not as casual as just grabbing your device and putting it on your head. This looks a lot like what you look like when you put the Void on, when you go to the arena. We talked about 360 video. One section of it, which you may or may not have, is 360 sound. 360 sound says, just like stereo sound, we triangulate. If you walk in a room, a virtual room, and there's a jukebox box in the corner, you not only hear the sound, but you think it's over there. And you turn your head, oh, it's over there. One of the tricks when you find out when you write VR apps is the more senses you entice, the more person's inside of it. It's much better to have sound there. It's much better to have visual, obviously, haptic feedback. It's a multiplier. So people like to put sound, 3D sound in some of the movies. Now, if I buy my camera right here, it does not have 3D sound. You actually have to have special microphones catch it in different directions. But a good app does have 3D sound. It's power of immersion. By the way, you can't get 3D sounds for a handheld device, of course, because your iPhone. The more headphones you have, the better. My headphones over here had speakers, but I bought little microphones to go in, ear plugs to go into it to help the sound. This is a new slide. This is one of the biggest things that's happened this year, hand tracking. Hand tracking used to be done by having a glove and know your position of your hand. Take a look, you can barely see it. That's what's called a leap motion device. They were popular a couple of years ago. It's a sensor device that can actually track your hand, give you a good finger thing. They mounted it on the end. If you have something like that, not only can you know where your hand is, you can also do gestures. So if I want to tap something, if I want to close something. So this type of device this type of interface is starting to come along. But they said, hey, do we need to have gloves to do this? No. Let's put a sensor on. Okay, do we need to have a sensor on? No, let's use the camera. That was one of the very first whole thing HoloLens did. I have to admit the HoloLens one was disastrous. I did not like it. I did not think it was a good interface. We are now starting to see ones for Quest and some of the other devices come out. Who's fooled around with this? This came out like 2 months ago. What do you think of it?
The Quest hand tracking?
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. I mean, it's a lot of, there's not much to it right now. You can operate the menus. There's some side quests that's starting to get some demos that are starting to pop in. I haven't got to try them yet.
My opinion, placement of the hands is fantastic. By the way, the whole idea is not to have the controller in your hand, so you just use your hand. Placement of the hand is great. The gesture recognition needs some work. There's a reason why the military, even though they could have hand gestures and voice inputs, still have controllers with buttons. It's faster to push a button and more precise than having your voice be identified or anything else. I think we fall in this. You're going to have controls. Even if we get the hand tracking and everything gone, I don't think controllers will go away.
The haptic is not there.
Agreed.
With the hand tracking. You've gotten used to that after using VR.
And the last thing I want to talk about is being sick. Nausea is an important part of VR. Number one rule, do not make your customers sick. Now, this is very similar to the statistics for 3D glasses back in the 50s. 10 to 15% of the people out there just cannot handle VR. My oldest daughter, who's a big techie, cannot handle VR. It makes her sick. Smaller number do not like high-speed motion. I got sick playing VR the day it came out because the only app they had out there was a tank game or a hovercraft game. And I moved around with the hovercrafts, and you know what makes you sick? A disconnect between your eyes of what you're seeing and the motion in your ears. Assuming you're not getting sick from some flasher movie or a motion on a boat. Most nausea, most car nausea is because you have a disconnect. The motion of the car is disconnecting from what you see from its sight. So how do you get around that? Well, you get around that by not moving within the VR world. A lot of apps do not allow you to mechanically move around. Instead, they have teleport as a way for moving one location to another. There are a couple other tricks. You play an app and you're flying through the air and you see sparks going past you, or you see the edges graying around. Don't think that's because they want you to think, oh, we're not good enough to have the graphics be full screen. Narrowing your scene of vision when you're flying makes it easier for you not to get nauseated. So this is a big concern of development of the software. It's a big concern when you buy it and which apps you pay. And other things affect it. Low resolution graphics may make you more nauseated. Small field of vision. Field of vision doesn't bother me. Low res graphics, like I said, the PSVR, for wonderful certain things, long term starts to make me a little nauseated because the graphics aren't quite as good. So everything we talk about, it keeps this in mind of people. Yes?
So, quick question. So does that mean that it's likely that, for example, the Omni treadmills will not go anywhere? Because that was a bit of a trend.
Which one's that?
The Omni treadmills, the ones where they're
I haven't seen the Omni treadmill work well. Treadmills are where you're sitting, standing, where they wanted to basically make a holodeck. They want you to be able to walk around and have the motion. I don't know. The problem with most of those is people feel unsteady. And the last thing you want to do is have them not feel confident in the virtual world. We were at the Void, and the people I went with were slightly scared of heights. At one point, we had to walk across a bridge in a narrow lava pit, and that kind of freaked them out. By the way, remember what I mentioned before, the more senses you entice, the more you feel in the world? As we walked across the lava pit, they projected heat at us. And that made you feel much more involved in the world. So I don't think handheld devices will do that. But seriously, they're out there working on some smellotrons to actually give you sense for a certain VR. Yeah, they're working on it. So that's the concept. So any idea ones we mentioned here, do you have any questions on right now? Because I'm doing about just perfectly for time-wise. Enjoying it so far? Okay. Let's talk about the hardware. This list starts getting bigger and bigger, except we've also lost a couple companies, so it's gotten smaller. I'm going to tell you the ones which I think are the most important. I can't possibly tell you everything on this list. See the more, that's not all the items out there. Let's talk about the high-end VRs. We've got several. We have the Rift and the Rift S, the Vive and the Vive Pro, the Valve, the Primex. There's lots of Primex ones. I think the last count is 7 different ones. And we also have the PlayStation VR. Last year we only had 3. The Valve Index and the Primex really wasn't out there. Yes, they were announced, but they really weren't shipping. We had the Rift, we had the Vive Pro had been announced, we had the PlayStation VR. What are the high-end requirements? I am not going to talk about this because now that we have multiple models, different devices have different requirements. Just remember, a high-end VR device means you have to have the GPU separately. You either have a graphics card in your PC, generalized suggest a 1070 or 1080 card or the equivalent, or you have something like the PlayStation, which requires a PS4 to be able to do the GPU. Whatever device you look at, go out and find the specs for that. Because the Primix, for example, different ones have different hardware requirements. And for the Vive, different revs of the software have different hardware requirements. I bought a 1080 card, and that's going to last me for a couple years. I'm a Mac user. What about the Mac? I'm sorry. You're out of luck. About 2.5 years ago, there actually was a VR kit because the Mac doesn't have graphics cards and because the Mac does not have high-end graphics inside of it, you actually had a separate external GPU, and there was a version that worked, and I fooled around with it. But support from that has since disappeared. I was at a talk with the president of VR, the VP of Apple for virtual reality, and he gave out his cards that said VR and AR. And someone in the audience said, well, what about the VR? You've been talking about the AR sets. He says, oh, at Apple, VR is silent. They're not doing anything right now. So we had first was the Oculus Rift. It's high-end VR, released in 2016. Original price was quite expensive, $1,000. Now $599. I believe I bought it when it was $800, okay? Don't forget, this requires a graphics card. It has dual 1080 by 1200. That is now considered the minimum graphics for most ones, okay? And by the way, be very careful when they have numbers they have. There are 2 screens here. 1200 is a single screen. 2 together, it's 2400, and the height stays the same. So if you see one trying to overhype itself, it says, oh, 4000. No, it's really just 2000s. Go by what the single eye can see. That's the number that most people use. It was originally a Kickstarter, and then it was purchased by Facebook. Facebook owns Oculus. Some nice advantages of that. That means that Facebook integration is really good in the app, and they have really good online presence.
Have you seen the news where they're saying that Facebook is developing its own VR OS?
Well, they have their own app store already, and let's see you go on beyond that. I don't know.
I think people were just afraid that it's going to turn more and more into like a social ad tracking.
No, but they're having third party. I don't think that's much as an issue. The Vive was originally designed to work with the folks from Valve. It was a joint project. They did the software, they did the hardware. We'll talk about that in a second, okay? These are the components. Again, very nice controller. They had desktop mounted. You put them on your desk, and generally most people thought they needed 3 of them. Originally it was for Windows and Mac, sort of. Now it's just Windows and Linux. Here's the sensors, there's the controllers. The Rift S came out this year. Price is $400, so the price has gone down. It is to the point where you don't buy the Rift, you buy the Rift S, okay? You can get Rifts used online from slightly higher graphics. The most important thing about this is that, now sometimes they call it inside-out tracking. That's a misnomer because they were inside-out tracking using towers. What it means is it's no tower. It has cameras on it, it positions itself. It has new controllers. There are some downside. It's heavy, it's tracking using the cameras is not nearly as good as Oculus tracking with the cameras, and the built-in sound is not as good as, they thought you have over your head microphones. It's not as good, so there's been some issues. But again, the price is really nice. The Vive, this is the one I bought because at the time was the highest resolution. Originally $799, dual screen. Its components are very similar, controller, lighthouse. It also has a $250 tetherless device. It was the very first one out there, so you could actually not be tethered because the cable is really thick. That's what the device looks like to make it tethered. Original release, it had issues with heat. That's gone away. There are some alternative third-party products. I saw one where the entire PC is on your back. That's a hell of a way to make it not tethered. Then they came out with the Vive Pro. This is more expensive, $1399, and I forget the price of the eye tracking device version of it. Higher resolution, was released in August. Eye tracking knows where you're pointing and where you're looking at, kind of like the military helicopters for the Apaches do. You can write some really interesting user interface games where I look at something or indicate my motion, where it's really, still no killer apps for eye tracking has been developed yet, but it's kind of cool to have. Then they came out with the Cosmo. It's pro quality. It's only $700. It requires a PC, so it still has tethering, but they said it transcends. What does it mean by this? Well, there's no tower, uses the same controller as the Pro does, and it's modular. So a lot of people are adding extensions on it. It follows the Stream VR standard, so you can buy controllers, you can buy GPS devices to attach, all sorts of things. This is a new area of modulation. We do not know where it's going to go. It's one of the interesting things that happened last year. Primex, I didn't even talk about Primex next year because Primex has the worst reputation in the industry. They were massively delayed. They oversold. The quality when you got it was a problem. And they were expensive. What a great solution. However, they are kind of amazing. 200 degrees of range of freedom. First version was 4K. That was the same graphics. 8K was so good a resolution that they could not send that higher resolution over the HDMI cable. So it actually was not 8K, it was actually 6K. It was a reduced size. I believe I have the specs there. It wasn't 7690 by 2160, it was like 5000, okay? Then they came out with the 5K Plus, which was the 8K, slightly less expensive. 5K XR, which was the 5K one with extended color range, so it was much better color. And then the XKX, which was the full range because they use a new compression standard that allows you to do the graphics. This is a whole mess of worms. I don't like them. Like I said, the quality is not that good, and I got burned too many times waiting for them. However, if you have a high-end need for them, take a look at them. I know some people will rave by them. Valve Index, this got everyone by surprise. Valve Corporation, they're the creator who created Half-Life. They're the ones who have a Steam store, which is what is used by the Vive. There was a joint project, and then they decided to come out with their own one, which is this one. You notice they're using other people's controllers and towers. It's pricey, $1,000, good resolution. The controllers are interesting. You put your hands through the controllers and it tracks your fingers. So you can wiggle your fingers and it knows what's going on. You can have your hand out and the controller is held on by the strap. That's why it's called the knuckle controller. It's interesting. More importantly, it's compatible with the Vive controller and the lighthouses. Matter of fact, that $1,000 price I don't believe comes with the lighthouse. You have to buy it separately. It does? Okay. Different packaging. PlayStation VR. Okay, most popular VR device out there other than Google Cardboard is the PlayStation VR. There are 10 million. Last time I checked the numbers, I wouldn't be surprised, it's up to 12 million now. It's the very first hardware out there that had a AAA app. Astrobots. Have you ever seen Astrobots? Astrobots won the award without the VR. When you had VR in there, it was fantastic. No one matched it. Now, yes, Beat Saber is probably the most popular game in VR. Astrobots sold more. It was also much better quality. Price $400, often bundled with software. That 3 million units is incorrect. That's the old slides. You can see the resolution is slightly less. It's not 1400, it's down to 900. And it does require a PS4 VR. We're running a lot of time, so I'm going to be pushing here. I'm sorry. Because I really want to get to the Quest. These are the standalone VR devices. You notice that one got trimmed out. Daydream went out of business. The Google project is for all practical purposes dead. Google software, which was called the Dreamscape, is all practically dead. Don't worry about it. It's no longer important. As well as Pico, they tried to come up with one that's been killed by the market. Oculus Go, May. This is the cheapest standalone VR out there. It's fantastic. If you're a school and you want to do VR, and you want to do VR 360 movies, buy it. Spend $50 more and get the 249 one because you need more memory to run the movies. It's not 6 degrees of freedom, so you can't play games where you draw on the air or anything like that. But if you want to have playback, it's really nice. Only one controller. It's a real small controller. It looks like a clicker for your screen. That's the controller. Oculus Quest came out May 2019 and it changed everything. Its release price $399. Again, standalone, no lighthouses, and it uses the same controller the Rift S does. This is fantastic. It can do everything the high-end ones do except for high-end graphics. And truthfully, most games don't need the high-end graphics. And it definitely does well on 360 videos.
Didn't they also announce that they were doing something so that you could do it with a PC?
That's this. This is the thing I want to talk about. This makes the Rift F's kind of obsolete. I'm not sure why you'd want to buy one. What this is, we're going to use the device, standalone, it works. I want to run something high-end graphics, I plug a cable in here to my high-end PC, and I can run all the same software that the standalone device can do. Since the screen is now they're not identical, but the resolutions on the inside is almost the same. I can't see how this can't be more important in the future. Okay, now it's still, the device right there is, like I said, is an Android running Dragonfly, but when you plug it in, it's a high-end GPU.
Does the Quest have 6 degrees of freedom then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
6 degree, and 6 controllers, which are 2 of them, has 6 degrees of freedom. This changed the game, and this is probably the most important one. If I was asking me, I had someone ask me this weekend for Christmas what to get. I said, get to your wife this one. The Vive Focus. Now, I'm biased. I have not only seen the developer version of Vive. Vive was released in China first, has only started to come out here in numbers. Some people who see it rave about it. I've seen them do standalone next to it. The ergonomics on the Quest is slightly better, and the plastic seems to be better. But so it has its following: 6 degrees of freedom, no camera. By the way, the first Vive Focus had 3-degree controller, not 6-degree. This is no longer, I believe, being sold directly, or it is in small numbers. It was replaced by the Vive Focus Plus. $799, much better, 6 degrees of tracking, it has 2 controllers. They emphasize business as well as the software, and both of them use what's called the Vive port, which is, since they're the ones who, it's the software designed with their app store, Vive port, basically. Google Cardboard, we mentioned it before. Don't spend more than $15. If someone's trying to sell you a high-end one, they're jerking you. This is a Gear VR. It's compatible with the Galaxy One. $100. This is an example of still put your phone in it, $100. The only reason I say this is actually worth looking at, it was a collaboration with Oculus, and it has a really nice controller. If you want to have a low-end one, I recommend the Merge VR. That one is not, it's the best one because the one has that spot there so the camera is available, so you actually do AR apps. Most ones, the cardboards don't allow you to see it. This one does. Be careful, they have various sizes for different sizes of your phones. HoloLens. Okay, HoloLens is kind of amazing. It has an amazing price, $3,000 to $5,000 depending on the machine. It's the flagship of mixed reality. And Microsoft pulled it back and released a new version of it. Microsoft is taking the real long term. This is not a consumer product. This is an enterprise project. This is not a game platform, so they write games for it. It's interesting, but it's not there in the future. Now, I think AR devices like this will be our future, but truthfully, if you've ever worn one, it's kind of a ghosty image. If you want a real virtual reality, it doesn't look like virtual reality. It looks like you're looking at a Jedi to Ghost. It's really not that good. And with a 30-degree range of vision, it's mostly, now I have not done the HoloLens 2. I've been told it's larger. Here's a HoloLens 2, $3,500. Oh, by the way they get around it is by having all the intelligence. It's a full PC inside the device. One of the biggest things between the HoloLens 1 and the HoloLens 2 was ergonomics. It was difficult on your head. You got tired real fast. To reset it, that problem went away. But it does mean you have a full PC up there with a high-end graphics card, thus the price. They improved the range of vision, 54 degrees, improved the power usage, improved the comfort, and the 3D mapping. Everyone in the AR industry knows that your 3D positioning is the most important thing. These used to be slides by themselves. These are other companies who bought in on the Kool-Aid from Microsoft and came out with 3D devices using the mixed reality. The problem is Microsoft's mixed reality is not being developed very much. So don't recommend buying any of these. Get something else. There's a lot of them out there. If they say mixed reality, steer away from it.
Can you get access to like a Steam VR with those VR headsets?
Yes, but it's hack in the sense that sometimes it goes away and sometimes it comes back. Okay, yes you can, but then we're still back to a device that was designed for something else. And all of them require, not like the HoloLens, these are all in the range from $400 to $500, and they all require a high-end PC with a graphics card, which has the same argument. Let's talk about the software, okay? We only have a few more minutes here. Steam VR, that's VR version of Steam. You have this app store, buy it. Google WorldSense, that was their detection of the world. I believe the project has, if not been killed, has been deallocated. So it's not as common as it once was. Microsoft Mixed Reality, that's going strong, but again, not intended for games. That's intended for enterprise applications. Native mobile kits, you'll hear these terms, AR Kit and AR Core. Identical except for platform. AR Kit is augmented reality for iPhone, AR Core is Android. And cross-platform platforms, they are toolkits out there that say, hey, program once and we'll be able to compile in different versions. Truthfully, the most common way of doing that is using Unity. Unity is 90–95%. There are some people using Unreal, but everyone programs in Unity. Let's talk about a failure, Magic Leap. I believe, did I talk about that before everyone got here? Magic Leap had $1 billion. They came out with some hardware. It's $3,500 or $3,000 for the devices. It has this PC in this little, looks like a little Walkman on your waist, and you wear it. And the graphics weren't that good. And they fired their CFO. I'm really scared of a company that fires their CFO. And they fired their CTO too. And I watched their conference in September. Very unprofessional. So I would not recommend that. Having said that, study, if you're a developer, study their SDK, because they had the most amazing SDK that tracked, they realized the most important thing is spatial, knowing your position in the room in reality. That was really important. So they had a lot of stuff. I was an early researcher of them. It was fascinating. But I don't think by the way, they've never shipped any product. They've given demo kits. So wait for that. And then the Vive Wave. I'll skip on that one right now. We're a little bit short time, and I want some QA at the end. Sorry. I think I just turned my own thing off. I'm supposed to give you guys a little bit of time. So is 2020 the year for VR? My intent is we have the hardware, we have the content, we have the software even, we have the SDKs. If we have a chance to have it be the year of the VR, we need some killer apps. And we'll see if that happens.
Half-Life Alex.
What's that?
Half-Life Alex.
So, do we have any questions now?
Granted, and my son's into all this more than I am. Of all the
Thank you for coming, by the way.
Of all the products that you said are just sort of died or they're not going anywhere, as you have the computer museum across the hall,
Yes.
if you were to buy something, just to roll the dice and have knowing that, you know, they're going to go into the shredder, all this other crap, what would you put on the shelf for long-term collectability?
Collectability. Well, sometimes you buy an obsolete thing for collectability. Oh, I'm sorry, thank you. That's a nice sign. He asked, which one would you buy to put on the shelf in the computer museum? Well, I have a Newton. Does that tell you anything? Yeah, that's guessing. If I knew that, I'd go out and buy a lottery ticket. I have no idea what the one is for collectability. Sometimes collectability is rarity. Sometimes collectability is the first one that becomes popular.
Oculus DK1 maybe?
Maybe, but remember, I mentioned that they were originally a Kickstarter. The first version was called Oculus. Yep, the DevKit one, right. So I honestly don't know.
What's holding back foveated rendering?
Holding back what?
Foveated rendering.
Foveated rendering. I'm not sure I'm familiar with the term. What are you talking about?
It's using eye tracking to just render exactly what's in front of you.
Oh, okay, yes. That's a variation of a level of detail. Basically, where I look at it, it is more precise than elsewhere. Well, truthfully, for most of the devices, they have enough graphics to render it everywhere, so that's not as important. Also, there's a little bit of the psychological difference. If you look at it and start changing, people feel that a little unsettling. So For special purposes, I mean, actually for non-game purposes, for looking at something, I look at her, and by looking at her, I see details about, I find out her social security number and where she lives, and details. Again, Tony Stark again. Or if I look at Microsoft loves to use the plumbing metaphor. If you're working in Antarctica, you don't have money to have a plumber there. But if a plumbing pipe breaks, it can kill you. So you put on the HoloLens and you look at the plumbing devices, and someone else who's a plumber in another location, he puts on the glasses, and you have telepresence, and he takes you through what you're doing. Well, then you look at the thing, the person knows what you're looking at. That's really useful because, you mean this pipe or this pipe? And he knows which one. So there are some uses of it. This is killer app territory. I don't think we've come up with a good idea what's the best use.
That's not exactly what I was talking about. You can move on.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, I was gonna say with that, like, does the Quest have eye tracking?
No.
Just the index?
No, that requires hardware. As it's the Vive Pro does, and I forget if the Index does. I'm sorry. No.
Yeah, well, I have a comment and a question.
Go ahead.
The comment is, I just wanted to say that there's an up-and-coming open source engine called Godot or Godot. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
They are also very interested in supporting VR as a first-class sort of thing. So just wanted to plug that and say I think it's really
Yeah, there has been third-party kits out there. Vive came out with one that was quite nice because the glasses are the same. It's the controllers a lot of times which are different.
And then just one question is, what do you think about the...
By the way, if you didn't hear, he talked about the, what was it called, the
Godot or
Godot SDK. It's no...
From the play waiting for Godot.
Right. It's similar to OpenVR. It's a standard for SDKs for both the software and the hardware. There's a big problem since we have a limited market of actually writing software. It's expensive, and the more platforms, the more likely we to write software. So they want to have SDKs that allow you to move around.
And the one other thing that I want to ask about is, did you discuss at all, I got here late, but did you discuss at all the solutions where you can lock in place?
No, I don't, because I haven't seen any ones that have been successful. They've come and go. The hell, we had them back in the 90s for the coin-op games, and I believe we have some here downstairs. Have you ever tried them? That you put on a belt and you pull in one direction, or you have it's hard to have a conveyor belt that goes in all complete directions, and people who do it sometimes trip. And if you trip, you could get sued. So they haven't been that successful. I've actually seen more of them being used at NASA than anywhere else.
So more of a, I guess, comment and question. So comment is regarding the foveated rendering. That is the Oculus Dome. They have the experimental where it's using the software to track your position. So that's used for graphical rendering actually, because it's the problem that people are having with the Quest or even with the virtual reality currently is that the graphic rendering is not powerful enough.
Oh, you're talking about real high-end ones. Okay, I understand then.
And so what they're trying to do is that to make it untethered but still have that high end is that,
It's for the dome?
or like, I mean, this is, the dome is their experimental one.
Yes, it's very experimental.
But basically they were saying is that and the place in front of you will be rendered in high resolution.
Are we talking about the dome that's around you like a little planetarium, or is the dome the glasses?
Like a dome, like
Yeah, I've seen the pictures of that one.
So that one is just used for, because what they're trying to have the problem of is the high-end rendering for a untethered device. So the foveated rendering is only used.
Do some of you understand the difference between ray tracing graphics and OpenGL, which is polyhedron graphics? Ray tracing came out first, it worked, but God, it was CPU compensive. Then we came out with OpenGL, and so everything is polygons. That's why you see games that look like they're shelled. I can't read that one. What's that say? Time's up. I'm sorry. But our CPUs and GPUs are getting so fast that we've gone back to ray tracing. But ray tracing is intensive, so they render what you're looking at first and then the outside. I hate it because your eye is always moving. So it almost has to train the person how to use it right. Thank you for coming. I hope I gave you an interest in VR.